So, as mentioned, my name is Michael Clark. I'm the Director of Threat Research at Sysdig. I'll talk a little bit about myself and the company just real quickly. Who am I? I've been in security for about 20 plus years, doing all sorts of jobs, but the highlights were I was a CNO developer for the US intelligence community. As if you probably couldn't tell, I'm from America. I was doing threat intel at a company called Computer Science Corporation when they had an MSSP. They no longer exist as that. I worked at a threat intelligence platform company as an architect and director of professional services. And more recently, most of you probably heard of Rapid7. I was a principal consultant and manager of their incident response team, which is a job you can only do for so long because it never ends ever. So, and it's always the same thing, which is interesting. And I was also a Gartner analyst on security operations. So I spoke about, how to make SOCs, how to run SOCs, threat hunting, threat intelligence, incident response, all sorts of things like that. It was fun. I got to meet a lot of very interesting customers. And my big takeaway from all that was how different every environment is and how much of a challenge it is to make something that can make everyone happy, which it's just not possible. And now I'm at Sysdig. So this is our marketing slide, which you see probably often places now, the infinity symbol, source to run, things like that. It looks very nice, mentions some things, but I work in the engineering department, so this doesn't speak to me as much. So we have a different slide that can really tell what we do. We try to cover all sorts of aspects in the pipeline, from vulnerability management and infrastructure as code all the way through to runtime. And runtime is really where my interest comes in. We have CSPM and cloud configuration, kind of like everybody else has now. It seems to be a checkbox. But what sets us apart is the Falco open source product. Our founder was a creator of Falco and the Sysdig open source tool, and eventually turned into this company. So we have a long history with open source and runtime agents for workloads, which is not very easy because customers don't like to give a lot of processing power, because at scale, that processing power costs a lot of money. So we spend a lot of time and years trying to make it as low impact as possible. And the Falco community is great at building rules and has been for years. And then finally, the response side. So what happens when something does trigger? When you do get an alert about crypto mining, as we'll talk about, you can kill containers, pause them, even kill processes and things like that. So that's kind of what we do as a company from a more detailed level. The Sysdig threat research team, again, this is kind of like the high level look at it. Our real goal is to provide value for our customers and also to help get Sysdig's name out there. So that's kind of where proactive research comes in. We also do machine learning, and that's a group of data scientists that work in my group. I don't know anything about data science. I kind of just help align them from a threat point of view, and we'll go into a little bit about that. So here's kind of specifically what me and my team do. We create all the rules and maintain them. So we don't want our customers to have to handle the false positives. So we try to stay ahead of them, and when new threats come out, we make new rules. So it's a nice value add. We also do proactive intelligence gathering. So we run a network of honeypots. Honeypots are systems put out there to get compromised. They're pretty low value, but they can provide some interesting data points and also test our rules. So they're kind of dual use. We also build a dynamic sandbox, which can take a container image and tell you exactly what it does, if it's good, if it's bad, and things like that. And we use those tools to help develop this report. We work with customers on their rules and policies. More mature customers may not need it, but less mature customers just learning, we can provide a lot of value in how they should operate this product and all the policies that they should have enabled and what they shouldn't. And finally, like I mentioned, we do machine learning to help respond to these kind of new cloud threats, but our way of doing it's a little different. We're rule first because rules provide the best context. And where we can't do rules, we plug in machine learning. So crypto mining model is an example of that. A crypto miner it can be tough to catch because it doesn't do much. There are indicators on the network that it might be doing something, but if they're using a proxy, it becomes very difficult. So we build a model that watches the system activity and can point out when it thinks there's a model. And general anomaly detection. I'm only a fan of that if it provides enough context to explicitly tell me what is going on, because I don't want to just say something's new or something's different. If it needs to tell the customer what exactly it is and why it's bad. So those are the kinds of things we work on. This is kind of a personal slide I wrote up when thinking about this issue. I've been doing this 20 plus years, and only recently it's become a real challenge to kind of do security, I think. And part of this is the shift from on-prem to cloud. At first it was kind of easy, like, oh, they're going to store something in S3 bucket. I understand that. And access with the API key, that's fine. And then they started doing like EC2 instances and other compute, and gets a little more confusing. And you can VPN to them, that's fine. I understand VPNs and how they work. But then things just kind of went off the rails, and now AWS has 150 services. So keeping up with the velocity of change has been very difficult, at least for me, as I get older, and trying to understand all these pieces. I mean, there's serverless functions, there's just all sorts of weird, wonderful things in these cloud service providers. However, the developers work faster than security does. It's just kind of a sad state of the way it is. Security's generally pretty conservative. Developers like to try new things and play with the latest toys. So it definitely becomes a challenge. And that kind of leads into how does all this work with security operations? And what I mean by that is like the Security Operations Center and DevOps in general. There's a term DevSecOps. It's not very well defined yet, so that's why I kind of have a question mark there. But the people who work in a SOC and the people who do application development are very different generally. And you can't expect anyone to know everything. So that leaves that gap in how do you get the two to work together? How do you get developers more knowledgeable? And I've been seeing that happen with better training and things like that. One interesting note from my time at Gartner is I took hundreds of calls on security operations and things like that, and only like maybe once or twice was cloud ever brought up. And this was right before the pandemic. So managers and companies weren't even thinking about how to get the cloud into the Security Operations Center just a couple of years ago. So security is behind because developers didn't stop doing that. And there's been no great, amazing answer on how to do this properly because you need education and knowledge. A tool can only help so much, as we'll see. And then, what are cloud threats? Really? I mean, they're kind of the same as you would expect on-prem, the same motives anyway. It's just done a little differently. Some things are harder, like extortion, but still possible. And some are easy, like stealing data is a lot easier because of misconfigurations, things like that. And no perimeter. So we'll go through a little bit of that as well in this. So a lot of this has to do with cybercrime, and I was thinking about it, how has this evolved over the years? And this kind of leads into why it's a problem now and how we have to approach it. So in the beginning, I would say this is late 90s, and the phases aren't discrete, and my years might be off a little, but it was all about ego in the late 90s. Like people were defacing websites for their group. They were having little hacker wars against each other. Sure, there were some serious things once in a while, but it was all everyone was still learning, even the criminals. I think there was even some major financial heists during that time, but they were the exception, not the norm. And then we kind of entered a new phase as more people got into the computers, more companies got onto the internet. In the early 2000s, it was all about theft and denial of service, like stealing and sharing PII. There was still no great way to sell all these things or make money, which is a good indicator of where things are going. But they would leak. There was a lot of data leaks at the time. There's a lot of hacktivism and things like that, just leaking data. But what we saw was, cryptocurrency and blockchain started to develop, and it gave a way for these cyber criminals to make money. And that's kind of where phase 2 comes in, is, ransomware and DDoS as a service. So people actually selling their infrastructure to whoever wants to pay for it, to denial of service, whatever target they choose. And cryptocurrency enabled this, because before it was very hard to pay. I mean, you could do more bartering, and the dark web was also starting to develop. So the ecosystem was really starting to happen to enable these guys to make money. And once people start making money, they eventually evolve into a company or a corporate-like structure. It just ends up what's happening, because apparently that works. And that kind of leads us into where we are today with phase 4. Because once startups and companies see a little money, what do they want to do? They want to scale up. Legitimate startups and criminal enterprises. And just as a legitimate enterprise would, the cloud offers a lot of scaling opportunities. And the attackers and bad guys have definitely taken notice of all this. At the same time, cloud adoption explodes, supply chain offers numerous possibilities for them to make money, as we've seen recently with all the open source repositories being attacked to have crypto miners put in. So that's kind of the way I see the cybercrime evolution. And if I think about it that way, where we are today kind of makes a lot of sense. So this is our fancy slide for the threat report. I think it's an obligation that every security company has to put out a yearly threat report. So we did our first this year. It was an interesting task to do, but we came up with some interesting data points. So hopefully it was of use to people. The kind of high level points are containers and cloud are just now too mainstream to ignore. Real money is being stolen, and cyber warfare is being waged. So we'll kind of go into each of those next. So this is our best data point I think we got out of it. So a brief explanation of blockchain and crypto mining. Blockchain's like a distributed database. Crypto mining is a way they verify transactions. You have to do a lot of math on the computer, and you get rewarded for doing that with these coins. And it turns out that people made them into a currency and can exchange them into money. So and you can do this anywhere that has processing power. And attackers notice this pretty quickly. So what we found out, the best way to do it was with graphic cards and things like that. But it can be done at a much slower and more inefficient rate with cloud computing. And that could be an EC2 instance, that could be a serverless function, that could be a free trial on a CI/CD platform. Anywhere you can run program and get network access, they can run their little mining tools. And what we found was for every dollar they make in the cloud, it costs $53 to the victim. Because it is extremely inefficient to run it in the cloud. That's why no legitimate usage of this happens in the cloud. It wouldn't make any financial sense. But attackers generally don't care about efficiency if they can get enough scale, because it's all free money. Another interesting aspect of this is the risk-reward ratio. So if you think about ransomware, it's become very risky in recent times, because if you hit the wrong target, you're going to get a lot of attention, like a hospital and things like that. Law enforcement's well aware of it now. You can't get the money easily. Customers, the victims like to negotiate now, and there are many services that provide that negotiation. And all that provides more and more exposure and being caught just to get the money. It's still definitely lucrative, as it still happens. But if you compare that to crypto mining, there's not as much risk as being caught, not as much risk as law enforcement, and you get the idea that it's no one's getting really harmed. It's just compared to extortion, but it's definitely harmful to the people who are getting hit with this sort of thing, and how much it costs, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars within a week, easy to a victim. And this generally happens in actually three ways. I only have two listed. The first is, the typical exploit route where you have a service out there that's not patched and they get on there and just install a miner. These miners will often be set up to try to move laterally within the network by using SSH keys that it finds, trying to take cloud metadata, or scanning the local network. They're not very smart. Sometimes they are, but if they can, they'll spread that way. But the two ideal ways for them are actually to do it by stolen keys. So this kind of goes into secrets management a bit. If they get a key that has permissions to create instances, they will just spin up as many instances as they can, as fast as possible, and mine as much as they can before they get shut down by either limits or the cloud service provider or the victim noticing. And this can add up very quickly depending on how your account's set up. The other way would be supply chain. So this is a very new, it's not a new issue at all, but it's now in the, consciousness of security people. All these open source projects are great, but they're all made by random people on the internet who sometimes have their domains expire, and then someone else can register that domain, and now they're the maintainer of that code. And this is happening all the time, and it's Python repositories, GitHub repositories, and then they just insert a line of code that installs a miner, just one line. So if you're not paying attention, you can easily get this in your deployments, and vulnerability management won't help you here because they only look for things they know about. This is where, as we'll talk about, like runtime analysis and detection really is helpful. And cloud service providers won't pay the bill forever. Often now they'll give you credit, they'll forgive the bill, but as you saw, I think Amazon had a large amount of layoffs this week or last week. The money is not infinite. So at some point they're going to say, all right, we're not forgiving this $500,000 bill and we want you to pay it. So this it's going to get expensive very soon. So it's not nuisance malware. This was like or commodity malware is what we called it in the old on-prem days, like adware. If you got adware on your system, no one cared. Just re-image the system and move on. Crypto miners kind of get lumped in the same category, but because they're not doing anything truly malicious, but the bottom line will be affected, then I think people will start considering it truly malicious. So containers are the next part. So we mentioned briefly supply chain, and we built a tool to go through and analyze containers as much as possible from like the public sharing sites. Ever since any time anything good happens and you can share it, someone always tries to abuse it. So there are a lot of really bad containers out there on like Docker Hub, Quay, and things like that. Well, most of them are miners, and some of them are actually disguised as other legitimate packages. But there's also another way that attackers approach this is they can put malicious keys in this. So instead of just leaking keys, they can add keys to these containers. And when used, they can change access or put a SSH keys in there so they can access later. So making sure you're using the proper and safe containers is important. And Docker Desktop is kind of a weird issue here because you can't control what your developers pull down. And if they pull down the wrong thing, it can compromise your whole network, even if they're just testing something, because it's just like running malicious code. We also had seen cyber warfare being conducted using containers. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the day after it happened, we saw a huge uptick in the amount of denial of service malware being installed on all of our honeypots. So this was people gathering their botnets and trying to transition them to participate in this war in some way, like the hacktivist sort of attitude. It eventually tailed off over time, but containers made it extremely easy because they can basically just install Docker and with one command be participating in the denial of service attacks. It was very interesting that even the Ukrainian government hosted channels where people could join and get targets from anywhere in the world. I'd never seen this before, a government asking for cyber operation help from random people around the world. I don't think it'll stop. We'll probably see more of it in the future. We roughly saw like 150,000 downloads of these sorts of containers that were pre-made. So either a lot of individuals were doing it or a lot of people's networks were doing it unknowingly. And I don't know if you want your company's network to be participating in these cyber warfare conflicts. So some of the key takeaways, cloud and container issues do have real financial impact, especially crypto mining. It isn't just a nuisance. Containers are both a target and a tool. So containers are a target supply chain, but attackers use them as well because, containers are great. They're a lot of fun and they make things easier. So attackers have kind of taken that on. We've seen entire containerized command and control infrastructures be used. So they're definitely leveraging the same tools that we are. And, the scale and automation just help attackers as much as it helps us to launch their operations or to take advantage of victims' operations. So they are moving right along with us. So what can be done about it? The uninteresting kind of answer would be general security hygiene. A lot of this is misconfigured cloud settings, too permissive IAM keys, inventory problems. Like I was talking to somebody recently and they got compromised and it was a crypto mining incident and it was one of their systems that a developer had set up in DigitalOcean that they really had no idea was there. So it's much like on-prem with those shadow IT boxes or those unmanaged vendor systems where, you can't control it, but it's there and it turns out to be your kind of Achilles heel when an attacker gets in. Vulnerability management, still incredibly important. Software composition analysis and SBOMs have made this easier, but is not the solution to everything because like Nginx compiles in OpenSSL. That was something that came up with the recent vulnerabilities. So those still need to be detected kind of the old-fashioned way. So it's not a silver bullet, but it does help. And luckily, tools today make it very easy to do software composition analysis, especially with Kubernetes and all these containers. And finally, visibility. So you can do all the static analysis you want, all the vulnerability management you want, but the only real way to find something going wrong is with runtime analysis. And that's where like Falco comes in and other open source tools, which is basically it comes back to detection and response, knowing what processes are doing, knowing what files are accessing, knowing what network they're doing, and being able to tie them through with all the Kubernetes metadata or the Docker metadata so you can track down what exactly happened. Okay, and that's all I have. Any questions?